How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and this is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation. We are in the dead months right now when it comes to gaming news while we build up to Summer Game Fest, the showcases from Sony, Nintendo, all the other publishers, but there's still a lot of PlayStation news to talk about if you're willing to look for it, and thankfully, I'm willing to look for it. In today's video, we're going to talk about Digital Foundry's new spec release for the PlayStation 5 Pro and why that's a really good thing. We're also going to talk about how the PS4 is the reigning champ of PlayStation consoles, and finally, we're going to jump into this Helldivers 2 drama that happened over the weekend. Thankfully, I missed all that. I was at a wedding in North Carolina over the weekend, and then I went down to Wilmington with my buddy George, and we went to the bar from Halloween Kills, and it was awesome. They opened it up for us and let us hold the prop bat that they used to beat the out of Michael Myers with in the movie. So yeah, missed all the drama, had a lot of fun playing games. It was a pretty good weekend. Anyway, let's get into these new PS5 Pro spec leaks. So we know quite a bit about the PS5 Pro at this point. I'm assuming that if and when this showcase that's rumored to happen this month actually happens, Sony will actually just open the floodgates and announce it, mainly because there's just so much info out there that I just want them to confirm it, and I think it's just about time. The latest update is coming from Digital Foundry, who's an ironclad source. If they're reporting on something, you can just basically take it as fact, whether or not Sony gave them the info or not. I trust those dudes with my life when it comes to releasing specs and anything related to hardware. This update centers on the GPU with the PS5 Pro, which is where the biggest upgrade is going to happen from the current PS5 to this new console. In terms of teraflops, which are a metric I truly don't understand, it's the one people throw around to show raw graphical horsepower. Regardless, it's going to be a 227% increase over the potential power of the current PlayStation 5. Now, what this document confirms, though, is that despite the fact that there's potential for it to be 227% more powerful in terms of teraflops, what that's going to result in is an average of a 45% GPU increase over the current PlayStation 5. Now, this is really interesting to me as someone who plays on PS5 and PC. So back when I was in high school, my first PC had a 470, like an RTX or GTX at the time, 470 from NVIDIA, and I had a really powerful CPU in this computer. I'm pretty sure it was like an i7 if I remember correctly. And what I was noticing is when I would play a lot of games, I would have no trouble holding a constant frame rate. The issue was that I couldn't hold a regular 60 FPS. So if I wanted to play games at 30 like I did back in the day, I was totally fine. And back then I didn't really understand frame rates at all, so the frame time could have been all over the place, but I noticed for the most part that my load times were quick and my frame time graph was staying pretty constant. And what that came down to was the GPU. So when it comes to the regular PS5, when you look at all the games that have come out over the past couple of years that are PS5 only, like Final Fantasy 16, like Dead Space, like Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, they're all 60 FPS games, which leads me to believe, and I've read this in other places, that the CPU is holding up just fine on the current PlayStation 5. When you go through an open world, you get quick loading times, like down to a couple of seconds. You don't have a lot of pop-in anymore. The worlds are really big, like in Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. That's one of the biggest open world games I think I've ever played. The problem is the graphical fidelity, right? Like you get softer edges, you get low res textures, you get just like weird frame rate degradation and everything like that. And what I'm assuming is that really comes down to the GPU. Now, on some engines like Unreal Engine 4, for example, or now Unreal Engine 5, there are CPU related issues, like when you're going between chunks of a level in RoboCop Rogue City, you'll see a little bit of a micro stutter, or when you're playing Jedi Survivor and you're going between different parts of the mini open world maps, you'll see things kind of pop in a little bit or load in as you're running through. You'll see a frame drop. That really comes down to the engine and bad CPU utilization. So not necessarily an underpowered CPU in the PS5, it's the engine not utilizing it correctly, because again, I play games on PC as well. I'm unfortunately unlucky enough to have bought Jedi Survivor on PC and on PlayStation 5, and even though my PC runs laps, like laps and laps and laps around the power of the PlayStation 5 because it has an i9, 32 gigs of RAM, and a 4090 in it, it still has the exact same problems in games like the ones I just mentioned, like Jedi Survivor, where when I'm going between areas, there's stuttering, the loading times are weird, there's like pop-in and everything like that. So what that really shows is that the hardware is not the problem, it's the game optimization and the engine that they're using for the game. game. So what I would expect to see with the 45% GPU increase on the PlayStation 5 Pro is a lot of patches for games that are only available on PlayStation 5 that get them to a hard locked 60 frames per second. Jedi Survivor's already at 60. I bet it'll be even better on the PlayStation 5 Pro. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, yeah, you get 60 FPS everywhere in the game, but the graphics are a little soft, the graphics are a little low res, Cloud's face looks a little weird. I would expect that in particular to be totally ironed out by the time the PS5 Pro comes out and it gets its PS5 Pro patch or uses the Super Boost mode that they're going to have on this console. Final Fantasy 16, one of the best looking games by far we've gotten this generation. When you're in combat, it is a hard lock 60 FPS, but then when you're running around the world and kind of exploring different areas, that's when you see it dropping into the high 30s, low 40s, you know, the like not great land of frame rates where your VRR TV is not going to be able to do anything to smooth out those massive frame drops. That is yet another game that I fully expect to see a new patch for in terms of performance on the PlayStation 5 Pro. And this is good overall because, at least in my opinion, it's what really makes or breaks the PlayStation 5 Pro. And by that, I mean better graphics and better frame rates, right? Like, better graphics are cool. I like graphics. I'm not like insanely, drawn to them. Like, I like art style more than I like actual fidelity in most games. And in 9 times out of 10, I'm going to choose a better frame rate over better graphics. So thankfully, it seems like with this increase in power that we're going to get from the GPU on the PlayStation 5 Pro, it's going to give that CPU more room to kind of increase the frame rates and keep them at a more constant 60 FPS. The other cool thing you got to keep in mind about the PS5 Pro is that it's like the last wall we really have between now, where there's not a lot of games coming out. Sony's first party isn't doing too great. There's a lot of third-party exclusives like Rise of the Ronin, Stellar Blade, which Sony bought the IP for, but that's more second party, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is third party. The PS5 Pro is kind of going to open the floodgates in terms of the rest of the generation. Well, we're going to see games from San Diego Studio, like their new IP, or we're going to see games from Naughty Dog, like The Last of Us Part 3, or this new IP they've been working on in between. We're going to see what Ben's studio has been cooking ever since Days Gone came out. All these games that we're just waiting for right now are going to start coming out after the PlayStation 5 Pro, and when I start to see more news stories like this that show us the true power of this console, that's what really gets me excited, because right after this console comes out, I'm going to have a whole roadmap of amazing games to look forward to, and so are you as a big fan of PlayStation. And the coolest thing about the regular PlayStation 5 is that it's a very powerful console. It's not the situation we had last generation where by the time the PS4 came out, it was totally underpowered. They actually held the consoles back by a year, or maybe even 2 years, just because of the 2008 recession and everything that was going on there. So by the time it came out, it was already behind. Games were advancing too quickly for it, and that's why you started to see games dropping below 30 FPS. They were running as low as 720p. It was not a great experience in terms of graphics or performance on the PS4. So the PS4 Pro was definitely more necessary, I would say, than the PS5 Pro, because this time around, despite the fact that some developers are saying that there's not a lot of headroom to unlock with the PS5, the level they're at right now is pretty good if you want hard lock 30 FPS gameplay at higher resolutions. The downside is if you're someone who really wants 4K, like true 4K gaming, maybe even true 4K at a locked 60 FPS on the PS5 Pro, I think you're going to be pretty disappointed with this console just because the power's not there. I mean, my PC that I just mentioned, it's top of the line, and if I want to play games at 4K, I've got to run them at a mix of medium and low settings, and even then with DLSS at like performance mode, I never get a hard lock 60 FPS. And once again, like I was saying at the beginning of the story, that doesn't come down to the power of my PC, it comes down to the games and the states they release in, which is most of the time unoptimized, unfinished, and not ready for the prime time to run at 60 FPS, which is just endlessly becoming something extremely frustrating, and unfortunately, it looks like it's something we're going to continue to see going into the future. And that brings us to our second news story here, which is all about the PlayStation 4. So if you didn't know, there's a website out there right now that tracks the month-to-month sales of the PS4 versus the PlayStation 5. Now at launch, despite all of the supply chain issues and X, Y, and Z, all the crap we had to deal with back in 2020, the PS5 was the PS5 The PS5 had a really healthy start to the point where it was dramatically outselling the PlayStation 4. But we saw this weird phenomenon when the PS5 kind of became available, when the PS5 Slim was released, where sales really started to slow down. It seems like every quarter, Sony has to revise their sales figures that they want to hit by millions of units because, unfortunately for them and kind of us in terms of wanting more PlayStation 5 games, people aren't really showing up just yet for this console. All this data is coming from VGC charts. They're a great website that tracks stuff like this, but at this point in time in the PS5's life cycle, so 41 months in compared to 41 months in of the PS4 life cycle, the PS4 is actually ahead by 153,000 units. And if you want an even bigger number, in the last 12 months alone, the PS4 has outsold the PS5 by over 2.19 million units. And then finally, that puts the PS5 at around 56.5 million units and the PS4 at 57.8 million units. So it's got a pretty healthy lead over the PS5. Now, why is that? First of all, you can't beat the launch of the PlayStation 4. Xbox set them up masterfully with that thing by having their weird system where your digital games and your physical games were going to be locked to your Xbox gamer tag. You'd be able to transfer them once to a friend or transfer it once to be able to sell the game back to GameStop. Sony kind of nuked them in the face when they did that video where Shuhei Yoshida hands the copy of a PS4 game to Adam Boyes to show how you can share games on the PlayStation 4. The launch lineup was absolutely incredible, full of great games that ran at 1080p and looked awesome. The price was perfect at $399. The DualShock 4 was a massive upgrade over the DualShock 3, which hadn't changed since the PS1 really at all. And Sony did a really good job supporting the PS4 with tons of quality releases. That first year was a little light where you were waiting for games, but once I think Dark Souls 2 came out on the PS3, that was really the last big game on that generation. And after that, it seemed like big game after big game after big game. Like, I don't even need to go down the list of amazing games that came out during the PS4 generation. And when you compare that to where the PS5 is at, I think we've gotten some pretty quality games this gen, like God of War Ragnarok, Dead Space, Resident Evil 4, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I mean, there's tons of games I'm probably forgetting, like Elden Ring, for example. There's so many good games that we've had to play since 2020, but it's not really anything compared to the amount of good games and the quality of the games that we got on the PlayStation 4. The games are getting bigger, games are getting more expensive, games are coming out even buggier than they did in the last generation, and I think people are really starting to notice that, right? And you've also got to consider that the PS4 was able to play the vast majority of the first-party games that have released this generation. I know there's a weird air around Returnal on the comments on this channel, but I just don't get it because pound for pound, that is the most next-gen PS5 exclusive, and in my opinion, despite the fact that I don't really like the main character at all, it might be the best PS5 exclusive game released so far. And just to clarify that point, I'm not talking about cross-gen games, because for me, personally, the best PS5 exclusive so far is God of War Ragnarok. That was just also on the PlayStation 4. I've seen a lot of like gaming journalists and other YouTubers saying that this is bad for Sony, that they really can't turn it around, but there's like plenty of evidence to the contrary on that. Like, look at the PS3 generation. That thing launched arguably as bad, if not worse, than the Xbox One, right? Like, there was no games for it. Games that were ported to it from the Xbox 360 oftentimes looked and ran worse. It took a long time for them to be ported in the first place. It came out, I think, at least a year after the Xbox 360. It was way too expensive at $600. But even with the dominance that Xbox had that gen with games like Halo 3, Gears of War, Forza Horizon, the list goes on there, Sony was able to turn it around by, once again, releasing great exclusive games later on in the generation, and that generation ended with the PS3 ahead of the Xbox 360 in sales. The game is not over. The game is right in the middle. We're at that point of every gen that we're always at where we're like, where are the games, Sony? And then they open the floodgates with a huge showcase or something like that, and we get game after game after game, and because we can trust in Sony's quality process, you're not going to run into bugs or unfinished games throughout the rest of this generation. So I think things are looking pretty healthy. It just sucks to see the PS5 not selling as well as the PS4, because in terms of like actual hardware, I love the PlayStation 5. Games run better on it than they did on the PlayStation 4. I love the user interface. I love how quick I can get into games on it. There's really very few complaints that I have with the console overall. And that brings us to the third news story of today, which is all about Helldivers 2. I'm sure you've seen all the drama, so I'm just going to bullet point it. Basically, what happened is Sony said, hey, PC users, we told you when you bought the game that we were giving you a grace period to not have to log into the PlayStation Network, or at least make a PlayStation Network account to link the game to your account forever. That's going to expire very soon in May, and you're going to have to make an account. And PC players lost their shit. Again, I'm agnostic. I love playing on the PlayStation 5 and the PC. I'm definitely more of a PlayStation 5 fanboy, so I'm just going to be real. I linked my PlayStation Network account to that game day one. I actually get excited about that because of the features that we're seeing coming to PlayStation games on PC, like how if you link your account in Ghost of Tsushima, you can not only play online with PlayStation 5 users, but you can also unlock trophies for your PlayStation Network account, which is my main account. That's where I want the trophies. I could not care less about Steam achievements, so I'd rather get the trophies in the game and have them applied to my PlayStation Network account. So when they launched Helldivers and I saw that I could link my accounts, I just did it right away because I have no problem with that. But as a PC player, I definitely understand where people are coming from, mainly because of other publishers. There was this weird thing that happened during the 360 generation, like right at the tail end, where every publisher was like trying to fight back against Steam, because when you sell a game on Steam, you lose 30% of the income. They thought, hey, let's make EA Origin, let's make Ubisoft Uplay, or whatever it was called, or whatever it's called today. They change the name all the time. Let's make the Bethesda launcher, the Epic Game Store. There's all these different storefronts popping up left and right on the PC ecosystem. It is a huge double standard though, because you have to link your Xbox account to every Xbox game you buy on PC, and you have for a long time. So a game like Forza Horizon 5, for example, you have to link your Xbox account. You have to log in the first time you play the game, whether you're on Steam or wherever else it's sold. And the sucky thing about that is, while yes, you do earn achievements for your account, it's a separate achievement list and your save doesn't transfer. You have to play the game on the Xbox store to actually get that save transferring feature. The same thing goes for Starfield. I'm pretty sure you don't have to log in, like it's not forcing you or anything like that. But even if you do, your save doesn't transfer with the Steam version of the game, while it does transfer from the Xbox store version. So if you have the Xbox app on your PC and you download the game on your Xbox, not only do you buy the game and get it in both places, you get your saves that transfer back and forth as well. And I know this is an unpopular opinion, so I'm like kind of throwing myself into the fire here. I just like, I don't know. I'm glad I kind of was out of town for this and didn't really have to engage with it at all, because it just kind of seems like the next big thing to be mad at that isn't really justified. The only thing that I definitely think is justified with it is that they waited this long. If they were going to require people to log into the PlayStation Network to play this game, they should have just had it there at launch. It would have been a minor controversy and it would have just blown over, because they waited like February, March, April, like 3 to 4 months after the game came out to do it. I think that's what really caused the issue. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you today. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.